Hello and welcome to Thought for the Day for Friday the 26th of June, and today we're looking at Psalm 88 and my name is Pam Cribbin. So have you ever had one of those days when everything seems to be going wrong, when you can't think of a single thing to be thankful for? Everything seemed to be dark, and to make matters worse, you didn't even think there was anyone you could turn to, any friend who would understand. Perhaps it wasn't even just one of those days, maybe it was a longer period. Maybe it is or was connected to a period of ill health, and of course we've all been more than usually concerned about our health just recently. Probably many of us can think of a time like that. Maybe some might be experiencing that sort of thing right now. If you have ever felt that way, then you're in good company with a chap called Heman the Ezrahite, the writer of today's psalm. As we've learned over the last few weeks and months, in many of the Psalms we see the writers calling out to God to rescue them from trouble, and in most of them their attitude changes to one of faith as the psalm continues, and the recognition that God is faithful and will answer their prayer. That sort of sentiment seems to be hard to find, however, in today's psalm. Heman actually gets a few mentions in the Old Testament. He seems to have been a Levite, a prophet, a songwriter and musician, a godly father, and a man of influence during the time of David and Solomon. Quite an impressive list. Surely God is going to bless someone with all those credentials. And yet still he came to write what has been called the saddest psalm in the whole book, the only psalm of his which is recorded. So can we today learn anything from what he writes as he poured out his many complaints to God? Here's a flavour of what he says from the Message version. I've had my fill of trouble. I'm camped on the edge of hell. I'm written off as a lost cause, one more statistic, a hopeless case. Abandoned as already dead, one more body in a stack of corpses. You turned my friends against me, made me horrible to them. I'm caught in a maze and can't find my way out, blinded by tears of pain and frustration. Cheerful stuff, right? One thing we can learn is that he's being honest with God. He's not trying to pretend that things are different than they are, not trying to gloss over anything. He goes on to say, as he fears he may even be close to death, this time from the NIV, do you show your wonders to the dead? Do their spirits rise up to praise you? Is your love declared in the grave? Are your wonders known in the place of darkness? He's pleading with God to save him from death, seeing death as a place where he will be unable to experience God. And in the final part of the psalm, again in the Message, why, God, do you turn a deaf ear? Why do you make yourself scarce? For as long as I can remember I've been hurting. I've taken the worst you can hand out, and I've had it. It's difficult to know whether he really had been hurting for his whole life, or whether that's just how he felt in that particular moment. Sometimes, when we're struggling, we do tend to remember all the other times in life when we've struggled and forget all the positives. It reminds us a bit, perhaps, of the book of Job, much of which consists of Job asking God why so many terrible things had happened to him when he didn't deserve them. However, I believe there are some positives we can learn from this difficult psalm. First, a couple of verses I didn't read out before. The very first verse of the psalm, Lord, you are the God who saves me. Day and night I cry out to you. And in verse 13, halfway through, but I cry to you for help, Lord. In the morning my prayer comes before you. So, at the same time as blaming God, rightly or wrongly, for all his suffering, he is still crying out to God. He hasn't given up on God. He hasn't stopped talking to God. He hasn't decided to just throw in the towel with God. I can think of occasions when my prayers seem to have been unanswered, and I've been tempted to think, well, what's the point of praying? It doesn't make any difference. Heman the Ezrahite doesn't think that. He keeps crying out anyway, and we should do the same. Secondly, our difficulties can actually draw us closer to God when we realise we have nowhere else to turn and nothing and no one else we can depend on except God. We may actually become more aware of God's presence with us during the difficult times than we are when everything's rosy. And lastly, The writer of the psalm didn't have the benefit that we have of knowing that his greatest fear, death, would be overcome by Jesus rising from the death and thus defeating death for all his followers. As the book of Hebrews says, he shared in their humanity so that by his death he might break the power of him who holds the power of death, that is the devil, and free those who all their lives were held in slavery by their fear of death. That's in Hebrews chapter 2, verses 14 and 15. And it's not only the fear of death that Jesus helps us with, but because Jesus became fully human, he also knows what it's like to suffer. So if we have times when we feel that darkness is our closest friend, which is how Psalm 88 ends, let's turn towards God, not away from him, and know that he is with us and knows where we are, whether we are aware of that and able to see it or not. Thank you.